The officer smirked at Haku, mocking him for barely knowing how to use the mask. Haku's mind raced. How did the officer have a mask too? But there was no time to think. His focus shifted to Miriam and how to get her out of there. The officer taunted him. Is running all you can do? Let me teach you how to throw a proper punch. He clenched his fist, ready to strike. Haku realized Miriam would get caught in the blow. In a split second, he yanked her aside, taking the full force of the punch himself. The impact was brutal. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he crumpled to the ground, pain searing through him. The officer sneered. I can be a gentleman. No need to put on a show for her. It doesn't matter anyway. You'll be saying goodbye to her soon. Those words ignited something in Haku. Anger surged through him like fire. He made sure he heard right. If escape wasn't an option, then he'd have to fight, mask or no mask. Haku's face glowed with an overwhelming power, and the officer froze, staring at him confused. What's wrong with you? He muttered, his voice tinged with unease. Haku rose to his feet, carefully settling Miriam to the side. His confidence was unshakable now. You want to fight? Fine. Let's act cool, huh? Everyone has a hidden side, that's why we wear masks, he said. His voice steady but laced with something darker. Just then, the scene shifted. In the hallway, Yushi walked past, a mask glowing brightly in his hands. The moment was brief, but it hinted at something bigger. The scene cut back to the chaos. Haku stood firm, his stance unwavering. If you want to fight, then start already, he declared. But the voice wasn't entirely his own. The mask had taken over both his body and mind. The officer, despite wearing a replica of Haku's mask, took a step back, visibly shaken. What the hell is wrong with you? He demanded, his bravado slipping. But Haku, or rather, the mask was already in control, ready to show what true power looked like. The officer's rage exploded as he screamed, A brat with a mask? Don't mess with me, you bastard! He lunged at Haku, his attack fierce and wild. But Haku didn't flinch. He didn't even move. Calmly, he warned, Stop! The mask, sensing the attack, effortlessly blocked it, sending the officer crashing to the ground. Haku glanced at his mask, realizing something. The more the mask's eyes opened, the more his physical abilities and senses sharpened. It was fueled by his emotions, his strength, his anger, and his burning need to protect Miriam. With blinding speed, he surged forward, fist clenched, channeling every ounce of his power into a single, earth-shattering punch. Your mask. It's the same, he said coldly to the officer. The officer tried to counter, but it was too late. Haku grabbed the officer's mask and slammed him into the ground. As the mask flew off, Haku darted toward it, shattering it in an instant. The officer screamed in fury, scrambling to his feet. What does my daughter Miriam have to do with any of this? He demanded, grabbing at Haku. But Haku stood firm, his expression icy and unbreakable. Everything, he replied, his voice steady and final, leaving no room for argument. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Haku's voice was icy as he spoke. Miriam and I, we're something that can't be put into words. He paused, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. And this? This isn't something you should be meddling in. The officer barely had time to process the words before Haku struck again. A deafening kick landed on the officer's cheek, followed by a massive explosion that sent him sprawling. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he hit the ground, but Haku wasn't done. He leaped forward, fists hammering down with relentless force. Each punch landed with crushing power, the final blow slamming the officer into a wall. The stone cracked under the sheer impact, dust and debris filling the air. One of the officer's comrades rushed to his side, shouting for the others to stay alert and grab their weapons. But Haku didn't even glance their way. Instead, he turned to Miriam, his expression softening. He walked over, gently lifting her into his arms. With a quiet smile, he asked, Should we run? His voice was calm, almost tender. A stark contrast to the storm of violence that had just unfolded. The choice was hers, but one thing was clear: Haku would protect her, no matter what. Blood trickled from Haku's mouth, dripping onto Miriam's face. Winced, whispering, Sorry. As she began to stir, Miriam's vision cleared slowly, her voice raspy as she tried to make sense of the chaos around her. Her eyes landed on the officer lying motionless a few meters away. Her breath hitched, and her body trembled as her mind raced, piecing together fragments of what had happened. Haku noticed the sudden shift in her demeanor. He stepped closer, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. Miriam's lips parted, her words trembling as she spoke. I'm the one who's awakened a living hell for us." Haku's confusion deepened, but before he could respond, the police officers closed in, shouting orders to kill him. Just then, a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" In an instant, the air shifted, the temperature plummeted, and an icy mist spread rapidly, freezing one of the officers in his tracks. The scene froze literally as everyone turned to see the source of the voice. Haku's eyes narrowed, his grip on Miriam tightening. Whatever was coming next, he was ready. But one thing was clear. The stakes had just gotten even higher. The officer froze in place, completely immobilized. All heads turned toward the voice that had just spoken. "The order isn't to kill him, it's to him," Yushi declared as he stepped into view. One of the officers immediately saluted him, clearly recognizing his authority. Haku, still unsure who this ice guy was, stared at him, tense and ready for anything. Yushi, completely unfazed by the chaos around him, raised a hand and removed his mask. The sight of his bare face shocked both Miriam and Haku. Yushi's gaze softened slightly as he turned and noticed Miriam on the ground. He walked over to her and said, "I've been waiting for you to wake up. You are the child of the first generation." Meanwhile, in a dark, hollow room, a man with a masked face stepped forward. "Excuse me," he began, his voice calm but urgent. "I'm here to report that we've just received news. The seed of the first generation has awakened." He stood in front of a massive table surrounded by ominous figures, each with a single, unblinking eye. These were no ordinary beings. They were the Council of Shadows, and their presence alone was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Back in the chaos, Yushi's revelation hung heavy in the air. Miriam's awakening had set something monumental into motion, and Haku could feel the weight of it pressing down on them. The stakes had just gotten infinitely higher, and there was no turning back. Among the leaders of the 13 tribes, one of the figures leaned forward and ordered Yushi to bring the child of the first generation to them. The sudden appearance of an old man stirred curiosity. Who was he, and why was he here? His identity remained a mystery. Meanwhile, Yushi carefully placed Miriam onto a bus, preparing to deliver her to the tribal leaders. Across the organization, a white-haired Manon, of the strongest warrior, issued a command for his subordinates to prepare. He would personally retrieve her in London. On the other side, Haku remained completely frozen, barely able to breathe. Even in this helpless state, his mind was fixated on one thing: Miriam. Was she still alive? A memory from his past suddenly surfaced. A woman had slapped him across the face, the sting lingering on his cheek. Her voice rang in his ears, filled with anger. She accused him of resenting them, claiming that even as an adopted child, he must have hated them enough to serve such terrible food. Haku stood motionless, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to say something, to explain, but the words never came. As always, the woman cut him off, shouting at him not to talk back to his parents. His siblings laughed as she grabbed his wrist, dragging him down the hallway. Without another word, she locked him in a room, warning him not to come out. Alone in the silence, Haku murmured a quiet, "sorry," and begged not to be left there. Through the door, he could hear them mocking his soup while enjoying cake without him. The only thought running through his mind was sorry, over and over again. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the floor, his head resting against the door as he kept whispering it. Time crawled by. He stared at the clock, waiting for her to return. But as the hours passed, reality sank in. It was midnight, and no one was coming. With shaky hands, he unlocked the door himself and slipped out into the night. At a nearby bus stop, he sat down, clutching a crumpled drawing of him and his mother. The memories came rushing back, drowning him. The way she left, the tears in her eyes, the feeling of being unwanted. His mother's face was the last thing he saw. Her voice trembled as she told him to take Kerthan. She was gone. Left behind, abandoned, Haku stood frozen in place. A woman passed by, and for a moment, his heart leapt. She looked just like his mother. Desperate, he reached for her, hoping, praying. But when she turned around, her face twisted in annoyance. There was no warmth in her eyes, only irritation. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" she snapped. Haku flinched, his voice breaking as he mumbled apology after apology, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Please, don't look at me like that." But his plea was met with silence. As the night faded into morning, a small girl appeared before him. She tilted her head, studying him curiously. "You're going to die like this," she said matter-of-factly. Without hesitation, she wrapped a scarf around his neck, the only warmth he had felt in a long time. "I can't take you with me right now," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "Make do with this and survive the night," the girl said, stepping back. She gave him a small farewell wave and turned to leave. Desperate, Haku called out, "Who are you?" She paused, glanced back with a gentle smile but said nothing. Then, just like that, she vanished into the early morning light. Haku remained frozen in place, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? Just stand here? No, he needed to move, to follow them, but his body refused to obey. His vision blurred. He was already slipping into unconsciousness. Suddenly, warmth surged through him. A strange energy spread across his body, and the ice holding him captive began to crack. With a loud shatter, it broke apart. Haku gasped for air, his breath shaky as he looked around. A man stood nearby, his back facing Haku. Without turning, he spoke in an amused tone. "So, you were a man after all. I thought a beautiful woman was sleeping beneath that ice." He tilted his head slightly. "How does it feel? Warm?" Haku stood frozen, staring at the stranger. Was this man helping him or toying with him? Before he could react, a sharp, searing pain shot through his body. It burned like fire under his skin. His vision flashed white. The man laughed at Haku's agony, clearly enjoying the sight. Haku gasped, struggling to stay conscious. Through the pain, he forced himself to focus and looked at the man with curiosity. "Who are you?" he managed to ask. The man smiled, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Jiang Yin," he said smoothly. "And I." Anything else about him was a mystery. Jiang Yin smirked and casually apologized for his strange question, though the chaos around them made it seem even more unsettling. Then, without warning, he asked something that made Haku freeze. "Do you know a girl with a yellow bandana?" Before Jiang could finish his sentence, Haku's body tensed. A surge of energy shot through him as anger flared within. Why? Why is everyone after Miriam? His frustration boiled over, and he screamed at Jiang. Why does everyone want her? Without thinking, Haku reached for his mask and swiftly put it on. Jiang Yin, unfazed, raised a hand in a calming gesture, his gaze sharp as he studied Haku's stance. "Ah, so you can wear a mask too," Jiang murmured, intrigued. But something was off. He observed closely, realizing Haku wasn't using its power properly. Haku, still fuming, finally noticed something strange. Jiang wasn't wearing a mask at all. Yet his presence radiated power. Then, where does all this strength come from? Haku muttered under his breath. Jiang stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "What's your relationship with Miriam?" he asked. Haku flinched. Instinctively, he covered his face with his hand, his voice dropping to a mumble. "This has nothing to do with you." Jiang knelt to meet Haku's gaze, his eyes glinting with curiosity. Jiang tilted his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "Are you in love with her?" The sudden question caught Haku completely off guard. His face turned red, and he stammered, "What?" His voice cracked with embarrassment. He wasn't expecting faith, didn't even know how to respond. Jiang chuckled but quickly shifted his focus, scanning the area. The ground was littered with debris, and a dense fog wrapped around them like a ghostly veil. "There are signs of a fight," he muttered, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Then, turning back to Haku, he asked, "Did they take Miriam from you?" Haku swallowed hard and gave a silent nod. Jiang extended a hand. "I'm looking for the people who took her too. Let's team up." Haku hesitated. His mind raced with suspicion. Is this just another trap? Sensing his reluctance, Jiang placed a firm yet reassuring hand on Haku's shoulder. His expression softened. "I don't mean Miriam any harm," he said sincerely. "I just want to make sure she's safe." Still heartbroken and wary, Haku shook his head. "Thank you, but—" Before he could finish, a loud noise erupted behind them. In the distance, a squad of police officers was closing in fast. Tension gripped Haku. His body tensed, and his mind raced. No time to think, only time to act. He scrambled to figure out what to do next. Jang, however, seemed unfazed, chuckling softly. "So, you're a criminal too, huh? No wonder they're after you." Haku glanced at him, confusion crossing his face. "Me? A criminal?" Jang leaned in, gripping Haku's shoulder firmly. His voice was low and serious. "Make a choice," he said, his words heavy with meaning. "We're after the same thing. Right now, we share the same enemies." Haku stared into Jang's eyes, catching a glimmer of something that felt like hope. He gritted his teeth, steadying himself. Jang's grin grew wider as he stepped forward. "Good. Watch and learn." With that, he pulled out his mask. The police officers, closing in on them, suddenly opened fire. Bullets sliced through the air, but Jang reacted in a blink. With a flick of his hand, he unleashed a wave of fire so intense that it forced the officers to scatter. The flames danced wildly, melting the bullets mid-air before they could reach him. Haku stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief, as he watched the scene unfold. Jang's mask gleamed with a wicked smile, a symbol of his power. The officers shouted frantic orders, trying to suppress Jang's fire, but it was already too late. Jang had made up his mind. There would be no holding back. As a few officers charged toward him, Jang thrust his arms forward. A spiraling torrent of flames erupted from him, roaring toward the officers. Within moments, they were consumed by the fire, their shouts drowned by the inferno. Screams echoed into the night as Jang glanced back at Haku, ensuring he was paying attention. "Listen closely," Jang instructed, his voice steady. "When you use your mask, deliberately listen for the voice of the darkness inside. It will help you awaken your full power." Haku's gaze shifted to Jang, who added, "But you need to be braver than you've ever been. Only then can you truly wield the mask." Jang pointed a finger at Haku, a smirk spreading across his face. "From here on, I'll teach you how to fight, and you'll chase after your girl." Haku stared at the mask in his hands, his mind a whirlwind of questions. This was just the beginning in an immense, dangerous journey ahead. As Jang obliterated the remaining police force with terrifying ease, he grabbed Haku and pulled him onto his bike. With the wind roaring around them, the two raced down the deserted roads. Their destination was unknown to Haku, but it was crystal clear in Jang's mind. The silence between them was broken by Jang speaking into his phone, his voice calm and collected. Haku listened, still trying to process everything, when Jang suddenly turned to him. Haku couldn't make out the conversation, but he clearly heard Jang say, "I'm counting on you," before ending the call. Curious, Haku turned to him. "Who were you talking to just now?" Jang replied casually, "It's just a woman." The response stirred even more questions in Haku's mind, but he held back for the moment. Shifting his tone to seriousness, Jang spoke again. "Miriam is likely somewhere ahead of us. We don't have time to waste, so you need to listen carefully to whatever comes next." As the bike sped forward, Jang observed Haku closely, sensing that there was more to his involvement in this chaos than Haku was letting on. Pulling out his mask, Jang continued, "The mask doesn't exactly respond to me. It activates based on something deeper inside." Haku's confusion was clear, so Jang explained further. "You can speak to the mask, but your transformation is weak right now. It won't listen yet." Jang's expression grew intense as he shared more. "My mask is called Cayman, the Mask of Calamity. It transforms me into a weapon. But the origins of these masks? They're still a mystery." Haku processed this surprising information, wondering just how much there was to uncover about these masks. Jang quickly reassured him, "We don't need to know their history. As long as we learn how to control them, we'll be fine. These masks adapt to their users' genes. They read your genetic—" Haku looked even more puzzled. "What does that mean?" Jang sighed, his patience thinning as he continued. "If the mask recognizes you as compatible, it unlocks sealed information. Powers, if you will. For example, some spit ice, mine spits flames, and yours. Yours just makes you stronger." Haku frowned, disappointed by the simplicity of his power. Sensing his frustration, Jang added, "The key to getting stronger is connecting with your mask. The deeper the connection, the greater the power." This reminder triggered a memory in Haku, a woman he'd encountered at the bus station. The one he'd felt an odd connection with, yet who had cruelly rejected him. Shaking off the thought, Haku focused on Jang's next words. "Miriam is connected to Cayman. Jang said, his voice heavy with meaning. Before Haku could process this revelation, a loud siren screamed behind them. An army of police vehicles was closing in. Jang cursed under his breath, but smirked when he noticed something officers were wearing masks of their own. Replicas, Jang said with disdain. Government experiments. Nothing like ours. He suggested they stop and fight, but Haku grabbed his shoulder, shouting, "No, don't stop!" With a burst of energy, Haku leapt into the air. In one fluid motion, he donned his mask. His aura radiated an unwavering strength as he declared, "I'll deal with them. You focus on the bike. We need to catch Miriam as soon as possible." Possible? Jang nodded, impressed by Haku's newfound resolve. "Remember, focus on your connection with the mask," he called out. With a powerful jump, Haku launched himself toward the officers. One officer, clearly overconfident, mocked him. "You should come out and fight instead of hiding." The moment the officer finished his taunt, Haku appeared with lightning speed, colliding with him in a devastating punch. The officer, stunned by Haku's strength, tried to retaliate, but Haku struck again, delivering another blow that finished him off. Haku landed back on the bike, his mask still glowing with energy. Jang, impressed, glanced at him and said, "Well done. Better than I expected. How did you handle that mask so well without any training?" Haku replied, "I learned everything last night. I had no choice. I destroyed them all." Jang stared at him in disbelief. "Last night? That level of adaptation takes years." As they sped ahead, Jang's curiosity deepened. "Do you know why everyone is after Miriam?" Haku shook his head. He had no clue. Jang's tone darkened. "Miriam is a first-generation child in our world. She belongs to a forbidden type. That's why she's compatible with the original Cayman." Sweat dripped down Haku's forehead as he absorbed this new information. "The original Cayman. Where is it?" Jang's eyes narrowed. "The cursed mask. Its location is unknown, but it's different from ours. The masks we're wearing, they're called the Forbidden Breed. Their full power is still a mystery." Haku hesitated, then asked, "Are they like nuclear or biological weapons?" Jang shook his head. "Number. Their power goes beyond anything we've seen. For now, all we know is that they're dangerous, and Miriam is somehow at the center of it all." The weight of Jang's words settled over Haku as they raced toward the unknown. The journey was just beginning. The road ahead promised more questions than answers as Jang continued to discuss Miriam. Haku, though confused and surprised, stopped him. "I don't care what you or anyone else says about her," Haku said, his voice firm. "I just want to save her and take her back. Nothing else matters to me, only her safety and well-being." Jang fell silent for a moment, glaring at Haku. Then, with a mocking smirk, he spoke. "I don't understand your obsession with chasing a woman in this modern age." He laughed. "You really look like a clingy bastard." Haku gasped in surprise, not expecting him to mock him. Jang's smirk softened. "I'm just saying, I admire how far you're willing to go for someone you care about. After all, I'm a man too." Before Haku could respond, Jang suddenly shouted, "The road is blocked. We have to stop here." Haku felt a surge of energy. In that moment, he realized Miriam was somewhere close. Jang, now alert, turned to him. "It's time to move. We've got a plan. We'll make sure everything goes smoothly." He paused. "Our goal right now is to destroy the transport vehicle and retrieve Miriam. Got it?" Without another word, they put their masks on and sprang into action. Their movements were a blur as they hopped off the bike, radiating overwhelming power. Jang counted down. His voice was steady. With steady determination, the two of them formed a synchronized punch. On impact, the vehicle exploded, its pieces scattering in all directions. Haku immediately scanned the area, looking for any sign of Miriam, but there was no trace of her. His gaze shifted toward the officers, already aiming at them. It was clear. They were trapped, and they had to act fast, but it was too late. The leader of the security forces appeared, his presence commanding attention. "We meet again, mob brat," he said, slamming his fist into the ground with terrifying force. Haku and Jang focused, shifting their attention from the leader to a truck speeding toward them from behind. "Dodge the attack, Haku," Jang shouted. The two moved in perfect sync, but for a split second, Haku froze. His eyes locked onto the window of the passing vehicle. Inside, he caught a glimpse of Yushi's furious eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, he turned to Jang. "I think Miriam might be in that truck. Can I go after it?" Jang didn't hesitate. "Go. I'll handle things here." Haku looked around, noticing a flood of enemies surrounding them. He hesitated. "Are you okay fighting them alone?" Jang laughed. "Who do you think I am? Don't worry about me. I'll handle this." With a swift, flawless flip, Jang launched himself toward the officers. Fire erupted from his body, sending the officers crashing to the ground. He tossed his jacket to Haku. "It gets cold at night. Put this on." Without a word, Haku grabbed the jacket and sprinted toward the truck. As he ran, the leader of the security forces began to chase him, but Jang stopped him. "Don't look away," Jang warned, his voice cold. "This is my fight. Stay out of it." With a single powerful punch, Jang struck the leader in the face, knocking off his mask. Jang stared at him with cold, piercing eyes. "Focus on me," he said, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "Just the two of us. Let's make this interesting." Meanwhile, in the truck, Yushi spoke to his father on the phone. "The family's wish has been fulfilled. We have Miriam." His father's voice crackled from the other end. "I'll be there soon." Yushi hung up and looked down at Miriam, who was just beginning to regain consciousness. Confused, she weakly asked, "Where are you from?" Yushi smirked at her sudden question. "I'm from the Military Intelligence Surveillance Bureau Security Department. We're the same age, but I'm no mere student." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "You're a first. I've been waiting for the genetic sprout for 6 years," Yushi said coldly. Miriam stared at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What are you talking about?" Suddenly, a vivid memory flashed in Miriam's mind. She saw herself as a child, standing over a lifeless body, blood dripping from her hands. Tears filled her eyes. "No, this can't be true," she whispered to herself. She was jolted from her thoughts as the truck moved, causing her to collapse. Yushi's anger flared. Well, if it isn't Haku," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're a fool who doesn't know his place." He stepped forward, glaring at Miriam. "Stay in the chains, no matter what happens to you or your little friend." With steady confidence, Haku stood in front of Yushi, ready to face him. Yushi put on his mask, his fury filling his eyes. Miriam, looking concerned, shouted at Haku, insisting he shouldn't be there because it was too dangerous. She appeared defeated as she told Haku to leave, emphasizing that this situation didn't concern him.